They laughed at her the first time they saw apples shining on her roof, like pieces of gold. Men stood outside the general store in Ash Hollow Valley, squinting up at the ridge where a lone cabin clung to the slope. The summer sun was hot and steady, warming the pine trees and baking the dust in the street. And up there, on that high patch of land, Martha Whitfield was laying out apple slices one by one across a canvas tarp. They said she had lost her mind. They said grief had broken her. They said no one dries food like that in June, unless they are afraid of ghosts. If you have ever seen a town turn on someone quietly, you know how it begins. It starts with chuckles, then whispers, then stories that grow sharper each time they are told. But what no one in that valley understood was this. Martha was not afraid of ghosts. She was afraid of winter, and she had every reason to be. Martha Whitfield was 42 years old that summer. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, though she did not bother to hide it. Her hands were rough and scarred from work that most men avoided. She moved with purpose. She spoke rarely, and she did not explain herself to anyone. By July, her yard no longer looked like a yard. It looked like a fortress. Wooden racks stood tall between the trees, covered in strips of salted venison drying in the sun. Fish hung from twine lines, their silver skins stiffening in the mountain air. Herbs were tied in thick bundles beneath the porch roof. Red tomatoes were sliced thin and laid out on screens. The smell of salt and smoke drifted down into town on the wind. Children dared each other to sneak closer. Women shook their heads and said it was not healthy to cling to the past. Men laughed loudest of all. Yet Martha never answered them. She worked from sunrise to darkness, her boots moving steady across packed earth. Every jar she sealed was placed carefully inside her cabin. Every bundle of meat was counted. Every pound of salt was measured and stored. She bought more salt than anyone in town. She did not buy sugar. She did not buy coffee. She did not buy flour. Only salt. The storekeeper joked about it. She did not smile. Because 4 years earlier, laughter had filled that same valley in winter. And then the snow came. It came without warning on a clear December night. The sky had been calm. The air had been still. By morning, 3 feet of snow buried the cabins. By evening, 5 feet. And it did not stop. For 3 long weeks, Martha, her husband Samuel, and their 2 boys were sealed inside their home. The firewood ran low. The food ran lower. Her husband went out once, just once, thinking he could reach the woodpile before the wind grew stronger. He came back half frozen, his boots stiff with ice. He never fully recovered. They burned furniture to stay warm. Chairs first, then the table Samuel had built with his own hands, and then the bookshelf that held Martha's small collection of poetry. By the 12th day, the oats were gone. Martha fed her boys the last thin bowls and told them she was not hungry. She watched their faces grow pale. She listened to their breathing change at night. Samuel died first. He gripped her hand and told her to save the boys. She tried. God knows she tried. But the cold does not bargain. William went next. 5 years old, quiet in his sleep. Thomas lasted 1 more day, 7 years old, brave enough to apologize for failing to protect his brother. Martha buried all 3 when the snow finally melted enough to open the door. She dug those graves with her bare hands in frozen ground, and standing over them, her fingers cracked and bleeding, she made a promise to the silent mountains. Winter would never take another soul from her again. Stay with me here, because that promise is what changed everything. By the summer of 1887, that most of the valley had forgotten that terrible season. People have a way of forgetting pain when the sun is shining and their bellies are full. But Martha had not forgotten. She watched the birds. The swallows left early that year, 2 weeks early. She watched the squirrels. They gathered food with frantic energy. She felt the wind shift in late July, blowing down from the northern peaks with a chill that did not belong in summer. The land was whispering again. No one else listened. Yet Judge Cornelius Blackwood rode up to her cabin one afternoon, dressed sharp in black despite the heat. He looked at her drying racks with thinly hidden contempt. He offered to buy her land again. He said a woman alone could not survive long on a ridge like this. Martha did not raise her voice. She told him no. He smiled without warmth and rode away. Below in town, men drank and laughed in the tavern, certain that supply wagons would always come over the mountain pass. A flower would always arrive. Sugar would always arrive. The world would always remain open. But in September, the rains began. Not gentle rain. Hard rain. 3 weeks of it. The mountain pass turned to mud. Wagon wheels sank deep. Then one night, lightning split the sky, and the earth itself began to move. Martha heard it before she saw it, a deep rumble rising from the bones of the mountains. Yet she stepped onto her porch in the storm and watched as an entire section of the western ridge collapsed. Trees snapped, boulders tumbled, and the only road in and out of Ash Hollow vanished beneath tons of earth and stone. By morning, the valley was cut off, completely. No wagons, no flour, no salt, no rescue, only what they already had. And that was when the laughter stopped. Down in town, fear spread like smoke. But up on the ridge, Martha Whitfield stood in her doorway, and looking at row after row of sealed jars, glowing in candlelight. For the first time in years, she did not feel helpless. She felt ready, and she knew something the rest of them did not yet understand. Winter was coming early, and not everyone would survive it. The first knock came after midnight. It was soft, weak, almost swallowed by the wind. Martha was already awake. She had been measuring flour by lamplight, adjusting numbers in her small notebook, and calculating how long her stores would last if the snow came in October instead of November. The knock came again. 3 taps. Then Elena. She reached for her rifle before opening the door. On the porch stood a boy, 16 years old, thin as a fence rail. His coat hung loose on his shoulders, and his cheeks were hollow from hunger. His breath came in short clouds that vanished in the cold air. "Please," he said, "just 1 piece of bread." His name was Daniel Morse. Martha knew that name. Everyone knew that name. His mother had died 2 winters ago. Fever. His father had never recovered from the loss. The man drank now. Loud, angry, careless. The boy swayed where he stood. Martha looked at his hands. They were shaking. She stepped aside. "Come in," he collapsed before he crossed the threshold. When Daniel woke, he was lying beside the wood stove, wrapped in blankets that smelled like cedar and smoke. Something warm bubbled in a pot nearby, and the cabin smelled of thyme and dried apples and salted fish. For a moment, he thought he had died. Then he saw her sitting across the room, still, watching. "You were close," she said calmly. "Another night outside, and you would not have woken." She handed him broth in a wooden bowl. "Slowly," she warned. He obeyed. Each sip spread heat through his body. His hands steadied. His breathing deepened. He looked around the cabin and saw shelves lined with jars. Red tomatoes, dark berries. The golden apples sealed tight. Bundles of herbs hung from the rafters. Smoked meat rested in neat stacks. It was more food than he had seen in weeks. More food than most of the valley had seen in months. "I am not charity," Martha said quietly. "If you stay, you work." He nodded. "You haul water, chop wood, check traps. No stealing, no talking about what is inside this cabin. Not to anyone." "Yes, ma'am. And if trouble comes, you stand behind me and follow my lead." He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." That was how it began. By the end of October, 3 more children had come. Then 5. Then 14 souls crowded into Martha's 2-room cabin. Only children. That was her rule. Parents stood outside in the snow, shame heavy in their eyes, while Martha opened the door just wide enough to let the young ones in. "You bring firewood every day," she told them. "1 load per child. No wood, no food." It was not kindness. It was survival. Inside, life became strict and ordered. Meals were measured to the ounce. No crumbs wasted. No idle hands. The older children chopped wood until their palms blistered. The younger ones swept floors and stacked kindling. Daniel became her right hand, moving with quiet strength, but solving problems before they grew large. At night, they slept close together beneath layers of quilts. The wind rattled the walls, but the fire never went out. For a time, it worked, until the first blood was spilled. It happened in the fog. January brought a strange, white silence to the valley. Ice fog rolled through the trees and swallowed the world whole. You could not see 10 feet ahead. Daniel took 2 children to check fish traps by the frozen creek, yet they never saw the man behind the tree. The gunshot cracked through the fog like thunder. Colton Hayes was 9 years old. He fell before he understood what had happened. Daniel caught him, pressing his hand against the spreading red on the boy's chest. The snow turned crimson beneath them. "It hurts," Colton whispered. Daniel told him to hold on, but some wounds cannot be held back. By the time they reached the cabin, the boy was gone. Martha took the child from Daniel's shaking arms. She closed Colton's eyes with gentle fingers. No tears fell. Not yet. They buried him behind the cabin beside the 3 graves that already marked her loss. 4 small mounds now rested under the winter sky. That night, Martha sat alone by the fire, long after the children slept. She had promised. Winter would not take another child from her. And now it had. But this time, winter had help. 2 names reached her ears before dawn. Marcus Kane, Abel Kane, and men desperate enough to hunt children for food. Martha did not rage. She prepared. Steel traps were set around the cabin beneath thin layers of snow. Windows were reinforced. Daniel learned to shoot without hesitation. Signals were agreed upon. If danger came again, they would not be caught unaware. It came sooner than expected. One night, fire lit the sky. The smokehouse burst into flames. Orange light danced against the snow as kerosene-fed fire consumed weeks of preserved meat. That shadows moved at the edge of the trees. "They want us outside," Daniel whispered. "We stay," Martha said. Bullets shattered glass. Wood splintered. Children cried in the back room, held tight by trembling hands. Martha counted heartbeats. Then she fired. A scream answered her shot. Daniel fired twice more from the rear window. The attackers retreated before dawn, dragging wounded men behind them. When the smoke cleared, her smokehouse was ash, but the cabin still stood, wet, and everyone inside was alive. 3 days later, the truth came out in the church below. Abel Kane confessed. He had been paid. Paid by Judge Cornelius Blackwood. Gasps filled the room as coins spilled across the floor. Blackwood denied it, but witnesses spoke. The valley had suffered enough. They did not hang him. They did not need to. They stripped him of power. They turned their backs. By spring, he was gone. And slowly, very slowly, the snow began to melt. But food was nearly gone. Shelves once full now stood half empty. 7 weeks remained until planting. 7 weeks between life and death. Martha sat by candlelight, recalculating again. Every ounce mattered. Every mistake could cost a life. She looked at the children sleeping on the floor beside the fire, and she understood something painful. Preparation had saved them once. Now sacrifice might be required to save them again. By late February, the shelves were thin. Not empty, but thin enough that every jar felt heavy with decision. Martha sat at the table with her notebook open, candlelight flickering against the cabin walls. 14 children breathed softly in their sleep. Daniel rested near the door, rifle within reach. 7 weeks until thaw. If the weather held. If no one got sick. If nothing else burned. She ran her finger down the columns of numbers. There was only one way everyone would survive. Rations had to shrink again. The next morning, and she did not soften the truth. "We eat less," she said plainly. "No second servings, no extra bread, not until the first green shoots break the soil." No one argued. They had seen Colton buried in frozen ground. They understood what was at stake. The days grew longer, but the cold did not loosen its grip. Ice fog still wrapped the valley like a burial shroud. Parents continued bringing firewood, their faces hollow, their pride long surrendered. Then something changed. Yes, it started with one knock at the door, not a child this time. Horace Brennan stood outside, hat in hand, the same man who had laughed loudest in summer. Behind him stood 3 other fathers. They were carrying sacks. "Dried beans," Horace said quietly. "We found a store in the back of the mill. Forgot about it." Martha looked at him. He did not look away. "We should have listened to you," he said. "We did not. That is on us. But the children up here are ours too. We will not let you carry this alone." One by one, more families followed. A jar of cornmeal, a small sack of rice saved for Christmas, a slab of cured pork hidden beneath floorboards. It was not much, but it was something, and something was enough. For the first time since the landslide, the valley began to act like a community instead of frightened strangers. Men repaired the damaged smokehouse with stone that would not burn easily again, but women gathered in Martha's cabin to learn how to slice and salt and dry properly. They asked questions. They listened. They wrote things down. Stay with me, because what happened next is the part they would remember for generations. The thaw came late, later than anyone hoped. But when the first trickle of water broke through the ice on the creek, the children ran outside like they were witnessing a miracle. The snow receded inch by inch. Mud replaced white. And one morning, when Martha stepped onto her porch and smelled earth. Not snow, not smoke. Earth. She walked to the small patch of soil beside her cabin and knelt. The ground was soft enough to turn. Behind her, Daniel stood taller than he had in autumn. Stronger, no longer the starving boy who had knocked in the dark. "You were right," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No," she replied. "The land was right. I just paid attention." They planted that day, not just Martha, the whole valley. Drying racks rose beside nearly every home now. Smoke curled from new stone houses built stronger than before. Root cellars were dug deep and lined carefully. No one laughed at tarps stretched in the sun. No one mocked jars cooling on windowsills. They had learned, and they had paid for the lesson. When the pass finally reopened in late spring, the first supply wagon rolled into town to find something unexpected. No starving faces, no desperate crowds, just a valley standing on its own feet. The driver stared in disbelief. "We heard you were cut off all winter," he said. "We were," Horace answered, "but we were ready." That summer, Ash Hollow looked different, stronger, quieter, wiser. Children who had sheltered in Martha's cabin ran through fields now green with crops. Parents who once begged at her door now worked beside her willingly. Daniel chose to stay on the ridge. There was nothing left for him below. His father had frozen in a ditch in January, a bottle in his hand. Martha did not speak of it, but she placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder the day they planted corn, and that was enough. Little Lily stayed too. Every evening, she still sat beside Martha on the porch, close enough to feel her warmth. "Will winter come again?" Lily asked one night, as the sun dipped behind the mountains. "Yes," Martha said. "Will we be afraid?" Martha looked over the valley. Drying racks full, root cellars sealed, smokehouses rebuilt in stone, men and women working together instead of apart. "No," she said softly. "We will be ready." And that was the truth. Winter did return the following year. It always does. But this time, no one starved. But no child was buried in frozen ground. No desperate men hunted in fog. The valley had changed, because one widow refused to forget what cold could do. Because she endured their laughter. Because she chose preparation over pride. Years later, travelers passing through would hear the story of the woman on the ridge who dried apples all summer, while others mocked her. They would hear how the mountain fell, how the road vanished, how hunger nearly took them all, and how a widow with salt, a smoke and stubborn courage kept an entire valley alive. Martha never asked for praise. She never accepted credit. When someone suggested naming the town square after her, she simply said, "Plant something useful instead." That was her way. Not glory, not applause, just readiness. And maybe that is the lesson. Hard times do not knock politely. They arrive without warning. They test what we built when the sun was shining. Martha Whitfield built in the sun. So when darkness came, winter she did not break. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes preparation matters. And remember this, winter always comes. But those who prepare do not have to be afraid.